Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage, out in the shop this afternoon in the waning hours of daylight. I'm looking out the window. It's getting dark out there, but that's okay. We're safer inside and the lights are on. Today we're going to talk about the TH375, Turbohydromatic 375. In the past, we've talked at length about Turbo 400s, over 100 videos posted about, hard to believe there's more to talk about, but there is. And I've dedicated quite a bit of time to some of its variants, like the TH375, which you find in 14,000 GVW one-ton trucks with 19.5-inch wheels. If you have 16-inch wheels, you probably don't have a TH375. But today's subject is all about this thing, the TH375. It's very mysterious, and most all the videos I shoot, I do zero research. But today I wanted to see online, if I just typed in TH375, what kind of information did I get? And boy, there's a lot of misinformation out there, sometimes from people that are in the industry. So I guess there is no, and this goes for all, in this case, Turbo 400 identification, this partial list of tag identification, but I don't know of one whole list that covers every year Turbo 400 and its variants ever made. So that's kind of a crapshoot, if you will. There's no, other than years of experience, nobody's ever written this down. A lot of people have attempted to try to cover most of the information, but there is not, and maybe there should be someday. Not sure it really matters, I guess, but it's fun for me to break down where it came from and why it exists. I will probably never do it, and I don't have any experience in buying new vehicles now. I don't see myself now or in the future buying a new vehicle. But, you know, back in the day, there was a time you could go in and order your vehicle, and you probably still can. And there was a, depending on what model line you wanted, there's a list of RPO codes, regular production option codes. And that's how you build your vehicle. And right up into the 70s, this was a mysterious document that would be hidden in the vehicle somewhere, and it was like the holy grail if you pulled up the back seat out of your SS Chevelle and there was the list of RPO codes. In later years, in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and on, it's usually right in the glove box because that's how you order parts for it. You know, often if you are looking for brakes for your 1-ton or 3/4-ton Chevy truck, you need to know what J code you have for brakes. If you want to know what rear end ratio you have, that's the G code. GT 4 or 5 would be 373, 410, for example. A GT80 would be a locking differential. So over the years, you had your M codes, which were typically transmissions, M20s, like the Muncies we talked about. And the Turbo 400 was typically M40, and TH350s, I believe, are the M30s. So regardless, and I tried, I'm going to get to why I'm talking about RPO codes, but this was probably listed in the glove box as an M40 because it's basically a Turbo 400. But it is not. So let's talk about the history of the TH375 as I know it, only from experience and what available knowledge exists that I trust. Most of it from experience because I was a transmission remover and installer right in high school. I laid under a lot of vehicles. And if you jacked up a early 70s General Motors station wagon, regardless of the engine, you had this weird tail housing and a Turbo 350 size 27 spline yoke on the drive shaft. Now, knowing what I know now, back then I probably wasn't doing a lot of critical thinking, but now I know that GM has a number, or probably all auto manufacturers, of how long a drive shaft can be and remain one piece, a U-joint on either end and a solid shaft, well, a hollow shaft. At whatever dimension, 75 inches maybe-ish, they had to run a two-piece shaft, a short front one with a center support bearing, and then the back one would slide and go up and down. So all your one-ton trucks would have the black transmission in the back as a traditional short shaft TH400, and it would have a threaded output shaft and a bolt-on yoke. There'd be a short drive shaft depending on the length of the cab and everything, and they would work out the two-piece shaft and the wheelbase that way, but it was way too long a wheelbase to have a one-piece drive shaft. So that's one of the reasons why a TH375 exists. In the station wagons, they didn't want to run a two-piece shaft. So from about 70 to 71 to 1975 or 6, you would find, regardless of Olds, Pontiac, Buick, you'd find the small output shaft and this 9.5 inch approximate tail housing, but not this tail housing. If you look at this one, and I'll eventually give you a better look, but this one's flat on the top. It looks like a platypus to me, but it's completely flat in this area. And a lot of years, directly underneath, right here, in 1-inch bold letters cast into the aluminum, it says 375 TH or THM. It might have said THM for turbo hydromatic. But in those early 70s, the tail housing was round. It did not look like this flat one. To further complicate it, if you go back and look at those heavy-duty Pontiac transmissions I stripped that were all full of water, they had a tail housing that was about 1 inch shorter and had the full-size Turbo 400 yoke. And in my list of transmission lengths, they list a 4-inch, a 9-inch, and a 13-inch Turbo 400. The 13-inch was Cadillac, I believe. And when they say 9-inch, that is the actual Turbo 400, like the Pontiac I just mentioned. There is no mention of this. This one's about 9.5 inches. And I dug this sheet out. You can't see it, but it's a list of all of the legacy General Motors transmissions and their lengths, or various lengths. And it also gives you the mount position. This is really handy for doing swapping, which I do a lot. So in this case, I dug it out because I wanted to see if the overall length combined with the TH350 size yoke was done to replace the 12-inch extension housing TH350. They're within 1 inch, but I don't know if it would cross over. But that could be the only reason I can think of that they ran or built this, the first variant in the early 70s, was to be a direct interchange in a heavier vehicle like the station wagon. In a 2 or a 4-door Chevelle, you'd get a regular Turbo 400 short shaft. But in the station wagon, or a TH350, depending on the motor. But maybe they built it to replace the 12-inch, which is very rare, Turbo 350. In the Turbo 350, they came in 6, 9, and 12-inch extension housings. 6-inch being the short one, super popular. 9-inch is pretty popular and is also a direct fit for a 700R4. If you're swapping that, you got to move the mount, but the overall length will bolt right up to your drive shaft. So in the 80s, we did a lot of that, and that is a good segue. So after the mid-70s, you're hard-pressed to find a TH375 anywhere. They kind of vanished. Back then, internally, they had probably 4 clutches in each clutch pack and still 3 in the intermediate. So in a normal Turbo 400, you have 5 clutches, and 3 clutches. These had 4, 4, and 3. And if you change all that, change the extension housing and tail housing, this holds true for this one too, everything else is the same. So if you add a few more clutches, swap out the tail housing and an output shaft, you have yourself a Turbo 400. So then they kind of disappeared for 10 years or more. In the late 70s, early 80s, General Motors was focused on fuel economy, so the first thing they did was put a lockup torque converter in the TH350. And that was, it wasn't a failure, but it wasn't necessarily a success. There was a few troubles with it. Part of that being people didn't understand why the vehicle felt kind of jerky at 40 miles an hour in and out of lockup. Nobody really explained to the customer what's going on under the floorboard. Suddenly you have what felt like an extra shift, but it would keep coming and going, felt like you had a bad plug wire. That was a common complaint back then. So they had the TH350C, they called it, and they came out with a 700R4 in 82, I believe, a massive failure, 81, 82, I think it was 82 model year. That was a massive failure. Over 700 revisions the first year. General Motors couldn't even get them to work. There were vehicles everywhere, and I was working at a transmission shop at this time. You couldn't get one to work. How can you rebuild the transmission that the people that made it can't even figure out? So I've said the story before, but that's why Turbo 350s are wore out, because we went and grabbed 9-inch Turbo 350s and swapped them in with the 700R4 was just to get the vehicles on the road with the customer's approval. It was that or wait around for an answer. So all those TH350 9-inch cores all got another life. They'd already been how many zillion miles and rebuilt them, put them back in, and they went again. So, and this continued till about 1987. General Motors got a handle on the 700R4, but they were pretty busy, so they got the TH350C, which is lighter duty than it used to be, and this massive failure with the 700R4. What are you going to put for a transmission in, say, a half-ton Chevy truck? That's when this showed up again, with this weird-looking tail housing. And they put them in everything. This came out of a 1986 half-ton. I know where the truck is. It's just a few towns over. I just picked this up last weekend. I know it came with a V6. That's a lot of transmission behind a V6. Pretty cool if you think about it. I heard rumors that it transferred into the next generation truck that came out in 1988. As we know, the square body that we know and love in a 1-ton version and a Suburban continued until 1991, but in 1988, Chevrolet GM came out with a new truck, the GMT 400, with much better quality, fit and finish. But under the floorboard, for the first couple years, was some type of M40 Turbo 400 variant or a 700R4. It is written, the Chevrolet SS 454 truck was made from 90 to 93 or 4. It was made 3 or 4 years. They made just under total production 17,000 of them. And almost 14,000 of those were built in 1990. And then the other 2 or 3 years combined only made up for less than 3,000 of them. Pretty rare truck, but most of the ones you're going to find in 1990 and under the floorboard is the 88 and up style Turbo 400 with the extra check ball. We cover that in other videos. The case is slightly different, doesn't stop you from building it into a good transmission, but they did that to try to soften reverse. But still, I have been told, and I cannot confirm this, I need to find somebody, if you know or have a SS 454 truck 1990, I want to know if it has the 375 tail housing, because 4 out of 5 online surveys say it absolutely had a 27 spine yoke, an output shaft, and a lot of them had that big bold lettering that said TH375 or 375 THM. I even sent my buddy a message this afternoon wanting him to give me the RPO codes out of the glove box to see if this did say M40, but the sticker is gone along with the inside of the glove box by the looks of it. So I could not confirm that, but I can tell you this came out of a 1986 half-ton, 8-foot bed, 2-wheel drive, V6 pickup. And that's where you're going to find them. In all the other models, the 4-wheel drives and the 1-tons, you still got your normal 4-wheel drive or short output bolt-on yoke transmissions. But in the 2-wheel drive half-tons, because GM didn't have any other viable options, that's what you got. And it probably quieted things down for a while. They went back to Old Faithful, and it got them by a few years until they rolled out the 4L80E, which is what you got in the other year SS454 trucks. In 1990, you got a Turbo 400 variant. So this transmission, the tag is 1986. The partial VIN matches my buddy's truck. And LSA are the numbers on it. I don't have a listing to look that up, but in this case, I saw it with my own eyes. Earlier in the video, I mentioned there was industry experts jumping up and down saying these didn't exist. Well, it does. And lots of them did. I have quite a few of these here on the property. So what do you get inside? Like I mentioned, in my experience, the early 70s ones had less clutches. They were purposely made a lesser transmission. The ones that I stripped from the late 80s, other than having these weird aluminum, at least they're aluminum, pistons in the forward and direct, has a really thin apply area, but you can machine it down, and they claim these crack, but it's probably no better or worse than the steel one. I've used these and have yet to have a problem with them. Not my first choice for a racing transmission, but for a street transmission. Again, at least you have the option of machining it, but you get yourself a normal short shaft, output shaft, and tail housing, and you got yourself a normal Turbo 400. Now in this case, and a lot of them did in the late 80s, I have the HD case. This one even had the 6-bolt aluminum cover on it, like a 4-wheel drive, because I've mentioned the HD case was made to carry the weight of a transfer case. That's what the HD part is. And as Chevy cases go, there's a thicker rib here. It's the best that Chevy did. Well, it's on par with the early ones, I guess, but it's okay. But it's still, internally, I'm probably going to find it has a normal amount of clutches, and everything else is just hot, straight, and normal Turbo 400. So, with a little few parts, you can get yourself a good transmission. Now, the reason this wasn't used, because a friend of a friend told my buddy that that's some weird transmission and it's junk. And they put it in the shed, and the other day I brought it home, because they went another direction. Actually went all the way around the barn, and now the truck has a Turbo 400 in it. But not this one. So that's it for today. Thanks for following along this twisted journey in my mind, mostly created from facts and my own experiences. Not a lot of facts available, so I did my best in this giant book I'm writing. Have a good evening.